Although this was not my first trip overseas, the mysterious London and Paris May term will be a trip that will stick with me for a long time. We began our trip in London with a day packed full of walking and sightseeing. I've never been to London before, so I was extremely excited to see everything that could be seen. My grandmother and mother both were high school English teachers, and as such taught me for years about British literature and much of the history associated with it. One of the first stops on our walking tour through London that truly resonated with me in my past with British history was the Globe Theatre. Long before high school, with Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, and Hamlet, my grandma made sure that I grew up with an appreciation for Shakespeare and his writings. Years ago, Grandma was able to come to London and see King Lear in the Globe, and she was smitten. Ever since, I have wanted to see the Globe, and I have now fulfilled that wish. Day 2 in London was probably my favorite day for sightseeing, as we were given a private tour of Hampton Court. I have had an interest in King Henry VIII and his 6 wives ever since my sophomore year of high school, when I was given the topic of Anne Boleyn for my final research paper. To walk the same halls that she walked was an overwhelming experience. However, my favorite part of Hampton Court was the clock looming over the second courtyard. The clock was absolutely gorgeous and intrigued me, as it told not only the time, but also the day, month, phases of the moon, stars' signs, and the tide that changed in the nearby Thames. On top of it all, it was completely functional. On this day of the trip, we also stopped at Buckingham Palace, Westminster Cathedral, and to top it all off, saw an absolutely sensational play entitled The Play That Goes Wrong. Caitlin, Kayla, and I also stopped at the Royal Opera House for a few pictures. Day 3 of the trip was marked by a trip to Bath and Stonehenge. Sadly, by this point in the trip, I was having troubles of my own and fending off the dreaded shutdown, which has come on multiple trips. I had absolutely no want to sightsee. I was visibly irritated by my surroundings, and all I wanted to do was be away from tourist attractions. I did not enjoy this day of the trip. I found the Roman baths tiring, cramped, and uninteresting. Stonehenge was just a pile of rocks. It is sad to admit that there was a part of the trip that I didn't like, but I cannot truthfully say I enjoyed this day. The only part of it that truly made me happy and allowed me to once again enjoy myself was an impromptu decision to go to a musical that night with Caitlin. We left the group after we were dismissed for the night and walked to West End, where we saw Kinky Boots. It was by far the best moment that I experienced in London. This is where my story veers off course from many of the others in the trip. After a violent run-in with the hotel bathtub at 3 a.m., I found myself with a couple of badly bruised, terribly swollen, and extremely inconveniently hurt toes. It was the perfect, if unconventional, start to our 4th day in London. We began by heading to the British Museum, where I hung back from the group and moved at a turtle's pace in an attempt to not inconvenience anyone with my injury. That wasn't meant to be, however, as I found myself in a London emergency room with our tour director, as the rest of the group went to the Tower of London and on a 2-hour walking Jack the Ripper tour. I mentioned my love for Anne Boleyn. I was crushed to miss the Tower of London, as that is where she was beheaded. On the upside, however, I got some really cool crutches out of it. All of the walking I missed on the Jack the Ripper tour I made up for on the 5th and final day in London. We were given an almost entirely free day to do whatever we wanted. Kayla, Caitlin, and I used this time to go to the London Dungeon and learn about the grisly and horrifying past of London. It was so cool learning about historical events such as the Great Fire of 1666 and Jack the Ripper, mixed with fiction such as Sweeney Todd. We also used our time to go to the Natural History Museum, where I sat at the entrance with my crutches, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, where I hobbled my foot off to go see some fine antique silver spoons. I really love antique spoons. The next day, we woke up early to head to Paris. I woke up with a cold that I had contracted from the London emergency room. I have to say, not many people probably come back from an 8-day trip with a hurt toe, a cold, and crutches. But in typical French manner, c'est la vie. This was my second time in Paris, and I was so excited to be able to see it again, this time with some free time scheduled in. This was not a great day between the crutches and the sudden rainstorm during our walking tour to Notre Dame. However, my favorite part was seeing Saint-Eustache, a church in the first arrondissement that I had never seen before. It was amazing seeing the architecture and freshening up on my French while reading about the history within its walls. For our second and last day in Paris, we were met with a guided bus tour around Paris before being set off onto the streets of Paris to do what we will. The original plan was to go to the Paris catacombs. However, they were on strike. Another great addition to my trip. Kayla, Caitlin, and I decided instead to head to the Musée d'Orsay. This museum is one of my most treasured memories in Paris, as it houses a large exhibit of Impressionist artists, my favorite of which being Degas. We then headed towards the Palais Garnier, my second favorite memory and my favorite site in Paris. The Palais Garnier, the opera house in Paris, holds a special place in my heart, as the last time I visited it, my group was able to tour the magnificent building and see the infamous haunted opera box that became the inspiration for the Phantom of the Opera. My day ended before the others in the tour as they went to the Louvre and I returned to the hotel to nurse my aching toe, bringing a lackluster conclusion to my May term. Overall, this was one of the better trips I had ever taken. Going overseas with some of my best friends to see sights full of mystery and wonder has always been something I wanted to do, and I could not have asked for a better experience. There were ups and downs, joys and pains, literally, but I could never trade the memories I made. This truly was the best way to start my summer and end my junior year with a bang, or in my case, a crash.